The sea has always kept its secrets, but there are some whispers that refuse to drown. They rise with the tide, linger in the foam, and echo through the forgotten ruins beneath the waves. Tonight, we journey into one of the oldest mysteries known to humankind, the story of a prophecy so ancient, so deeply hidden, that even the gods themselves seem to fear its revelation. This is the lost prophecy of Atlantis, and the secrets buried beneath the waves. Long before time began to carve its marks on stone, before empires rose and fell on the shores of the earth, there existed a kingdom of unmatched brilliance. Atlantis was not merely a city, it was the beating heart of an entire civilization, a jewel forged by wisdom, ambition, and power. Its towers rose like mountains of glass and stone, reflecting the light of a sun that seemed to shine only for them. The oceans, vast and endless, bowed to their command. Ships sailed across waters guided by knowledge that far surpassed any other. Their people were scholars, mystics, builders, dreamers. But what made them truly extraordinary was not what they had, but what they believed. They believed in destiny. They believed in prophecy. And they believed in a crown that did not belong to men, but to the sea itself. Legends speak of a night when the stars trembled, and the waters carried voices not of this world. The oracle of Atlantis, cloaked in robes of silver and sapphire, had stood before the great council and spoken of shadows yet to come. The prophecy told of a crown, carved not from gold but from coral, imbued with the very essence of the ocean. Whoever bore it would hold dominion not only over Atlantis but over all kingdoms touched by water. Yet it carried a curse, for the ocean does not grant without demanding its price. The prophecy warned that when greed outweighed wisdom, the sea would rise to reclaim its crown. For centuries, the prophecy lingered in silence, a tale whispered to children, a myth sung in the halls of marble palaces. Atlantis prospered beyond measure. Their libraries brimmed with knowledge that would take centuries for humankind to rediscover. Their machines could harness the energy of the earth itself. Their healers could mend wounds that others thought impossible. But greatness is never immune to corruption. With each generation, the memory of the prophecy faded. The crown, they believed, was not a curse but a promise, a divine inheritance waiting to be claimed. And so began the descent, slow and unseen, into the very depths of their undoing. There was a prince, born beneath the moonlit tides, whose destiny was bound to the prophecy. His name was Kael, the last son of Atlantis. From the moment of his birth, the ocean seemed to answer him. Waves bent to his will, storms calmed at his touch. The people whispered that he was chosen, that he alone could claim the crown of the sea. But the oracle, now frail and aged, warned the council that the boy's path would bring either salvation or ruin. Oa is the wave, she said, e and a wave can lift or it can drown. Kael grew in the shadow of expectations. Every step he took was measured against the weight of the prophecy. He was taught not only the arts of war and statecraft but also the hidden knowledge of the ancients. In secret, he was shown the scripts carved on crystal tablets, words older than Atlantis itself. They spoke of storms that would darken the skies, of cities swallowed whole, of voices crying beneath the sea. And always, always, the crown. But prophecy is a dangerous thing. It does not reveal truth, it reveals possibility. And possibility is as fragile as glass. For every elder who saw Kael as the savior, there were others who saw him as a threat. They believed that the boy's existence would bring the Oceana's wrath upon them. Whispers turned to doubt, doubt turned to fear, and fear, as it always does, turned to hatred. Yet Kael was no tyrant in the making. He was a boy who loved the sea as one loves a mother. He would spend hours at the shore, listening to the waves, as though they were speaking to him. And perhaps they were. For on nights when the moon was full and the waters shone like liquid silver, Kael would hear faint voices carried in the wind. They spoke of a crown hidden in the deepest trench, guarded by shadows that had never seen the sun. They spoke of a throne not made of stone but of tide and current. They spoke of a choice, one that would decide the fate of his people. As Kael grew older, his powers only deepened. He could breathe beneath the waves longer than any man. He could hear the songs of creatures that dwelled in the abyss. The sea, in all its vastness, seemed to recognize him. But the prophecy loomed like a storm cloud. Every vision the oracle gave grew darker, every warning more desperate. She begged the council to abandon the search for the crown, to seal away the prophecy forever. But power blinds even the wisest of men. To them, the crown was no curse, it was a key. And so, they sent their fleets to scour the ocean depths, to find the relic that the sea had hidden. Years passed, and Atlantis changed. Where once there was harmony, now there was hunger. Where once there was wisdom, now there was war. Expeditions to the deep trenches cost countless lives. Ships vanished without a trace, swallowed by storms that rose from calm waters. Strange creatures began to stir in the abyss, as if awakened by the arrogance of men. Still, the council persisted, their eyes fixed on the promise of ultimate dominion. And Kael, torn between duty and dread, felt the tides shifting against him. One night, as the city slept beneath a sky of burning stars, Kael dreamt. In his dream, he stood at the edge of a black sea. The waters whispered his name, pulling him into their depths. He sank deeper and deeper, past ruins and bones, past shadows that stretched like endless hands. And there, in the heart of the abyss, he saw the crown. It glowed with an otherworldly light, coral and pearl woven together, beating like a living heart. But as he reached for it, the sea erupted with screams. Hands of water seized him, pulling him down, drowning him in darkness. He awoke in terror, his lungs burning as though he had truly drowned. And in the distance, he heard the Oraclea's voice, faint and trembling. Old prophecy has awoken. From that day onward, the city was never the same. Storms gathered more often, the tides grew restless, and the once bright skies of Atlantis dimmed with foreboding. Some said it was coincidence. Others whispered that Kael's destiny had begun to unfold. And deep within his soul, the prince knew that the sea was waiting, and its patience was running thin. The days that followed Kael's dream unfolded like waves crashing upon a cliff, relentless, unyielding, impossible to ignore. The Oraclea's trembling words spread through Atlantis like wildfire. Some dismissed them as the ramblings of an old woman whose sight had been clouded by age. But there were others, those who still remembered the weight of ancient warnings, who believed that her visions carried the mark of truth. Fear began to thread itself through the city's veins, silent but suffocating. Kael felt it in the way people looked at him. Their eyes no longer saw a prince, no longer saw the boy who walked among them with kindness and laughter. Instead, they saw an omen. Mothers pulled their children closer when he passed. Fishermen muttered prayers under their breath at the sight of him. Even the council, once his teachers and protectors, now watched him with suspicion. He had become the embodiment of the prophecy, and in their fear, they began to wonder if Atlantis would be safer without him. But Kael could not run from his destiny. Each night the dreams returned, pulling him deeper into visions of the crown and the abyss. And with each vision, the sea seemed to demand more of him. The water grew colder, the waves heavier, the creatures of the deep more restless. He tried to confide in his father, the king of Atlantis, but the man was torn between love for his son and loyalty to the council. You must be strong, the king told him. Destiny is a tide we cannot turn back. But remember, even the tide obeys the moon. You must find your balance, Kael, before the sea takes it from you. Despite his father's words, Kael felt the weight of isolation pressing harder. He sought refuge where he always had in the ocean itself. Diving into the waters, he found solace among the coral reefs and schools of silver fish. Down there, the whispers grew clearer. Sometimes they were soft, like lullabies sung by unseen voices. Other times they were sharp, commands echoing in the currents. The sea was calling him, guiding him towards something inevitable. It was during one of these dives that Kael encountered something he had never seen before. Deep within a trench, far beyond where light could reach, he found ruins, ancient structures older even than Atlantis. Columns of black stone carved with symbols he did not recognize, half buried in silt and guarded by shadows that shifted unnaturally. As he approached, the water trembled with a low hum, and a vision struck him so violently he nearly lost his breath. He saw Atlantis, not as it was, but as it would be, towers collapsing, flames hissing against rising waves, voices screaming as the ocean consumed everything. And at the heart of it all, he saw himself, standing with the crown upon his head, his eyes glowing like the abyss, his people bowing not in reverence but in terror. Kael surfaced in a panic, gasping, his heart pounding like a drum. He knew then that the prophecy was not a story to be dismissed. It was alive, and it was unfolding through him. But what frightened him most was the uncertainty. Was he destined to save Atlantis, or to destroy it? Meanwhile, the council grew more desperate. Expeditions into the deep brought back fragments of coral glowing with unnatural light, shards of what they believed to be remnants of the crown. Each discovery fueled their obsession. They ignored the Oraclea Euro's pleas, silenced the voices of dissent, and poured all their resources into finding the relic. To them, Kael was no longer a Prince Euro, they saw him as the vessel through which the crown would reveal itself. And so they began to tighten their control over him. Kael Euro's every move was watched. Guards shadowed his steps. His freedom to wander the shores was restricted. Whispers of betrayal reached his ears. Euro, plans to bind him, to force the crown upon him when it was found, regardless of the cost. It was then that Kael realized he could no longer trust those who once raised him. If he was to uncover the truth of the prophecy, he would have to do it alone. One night, as the city slept, Kael ventured into the Oraclea Euro's temple. The chamber was lit only by the faint glow of crystals embedded in the walls. The old woman sat in silence, her eyes closed, as though she had been waiting for him. When she spoke, her voice was frail but steady. A Euro-OC has chosen you, child. But choice is a double-edged current. You may ride the wave or be consumed by it. A Euro Kael knelt before her, desperation in his voice. A Euro, tell me what I must do. Tell me how to stop this. A Euro, the Oraclea Euro's gaze pierced him, ancient and sorrowful. A Euro, you cannot stop. What has already begun, but you can decide how it will end. The crown does not belong to men. It is the heart of the ocean, and it demands balance. If you take it in greed, the sea will rise and devour. If you take it in sacrifice, the sea may yet forgive. But know this, Kael Euro, every prophecy has a price. And yours will demand more than you are willing to give. A Euro, her words haunted him. Sacrifice. What could the sea demand that he was unwilling to surrender? His crown, his freedom, his life. The following days grew darker still. Earthquakes shook the ocean floor. Strange lights flickered beneath the waters, too vast to be creatures, too alive to be storms. Fishermen returned with stories of leviathans rising from the deep, their eyes glowing like fire. Atlantis trembled on the edge of ruin, and still the council refused to listen. They believed the crown was within their reach, that salvation would come only through power. Kael knew then that the choice was his alone. He had to find the crown before the council did. Not to wield it, but to protect it. For if it fell into their hands, the Prophesia Euro's darkest vision would become reality. And so, under the cloak of night, Kael set sail on a small vessel, leaving the golden towers of Atlantis behind. The waves carried him into uncharted waters, guided only by the whispers that had haunted him since childhood. He did not know where the journey would end, only that it must. As days turned to nights and back again, Kael ventured farther than any Atlantean had dared. The sea tested him with storms, with hunger, with solitude. Yet in his struggle, he found clarity. Each wave that threatened to drown him reminded him that he was still alive, still fighting, still chosen. And always, in the silence between the tides, he heard the faint call of the crown. At last, his journey brought him to the edge of a vast chasm in the ocean floor, a wound in the earth so deep it seemed to swallow light itself. Here, the water grew unnaturally still, as though holding its breath. Kael knew he had arrived. This was the abyss from his visions, the resting place of the crown. He dove into the depths, his lungs burning, his body trembling against the crushing weight of the water. Darkness swallowed him whole, but the glow of the crown pulsed faintly in the distance, guiding him like a star. He swam closer, heart pounding, until he stood before it. The crown was magnificent, alive with a power that felt both divine and terrible. Coral branches intertwined like veins, pearls glowed like captive moons, and the entire relic seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the ocean itself. For a moment, Kael was overcome with awe. This was not an object of conquest Euro, it was a living force, older than Atlantis, older than man. And then the voices came. They surged through the water, filling his mind, pulling at his soul. They spoke in tongues he could not understand yet somehow knew. They offered him power, dominion, immortality. They promised him the world, if only he would claim the crown. But beneath the promises, Kael heard something else. A cry, a plea. The ocean was not offering him a gift Euro, it was begging him to choose wisely. His hand trembled as he reached toward the crown. The water grew colder, the darkness pressing tighter. He knew this was the moment the prophecy had always spoken of. Salvation or ruin, balance or destruction. As his fingers brushed the coral, the sea erupted around him. Shadows surged from the abyss, monstrous forms with eyes like burning coals. The guardians of the crown had awoken. Kael had no choice. The battle for Atlantis and for his soul had begun. The water split with a roar that was not of the world above, a thunder that echoed through the abyss. From the shadows came shapes vast and ancient, guardians that had slumbered for eons, awakened by Kael's touch upon the crown. Their eyes burned like twin suns beneath the sea, their bodies coiled with power that could shatter stone. They were not creatures of flesh alone, but living echoes of the Oceana-Euro's wrath, born from currents and storms, protectors of the balance that men had long forgotten. Kael's heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing like a drum of war. The crown pulsed before him, its glow intensifying as though testing him, demanding that he prove himself worthy or fall as countless others had before. He reached for his blade, a weapon forged in the sacred fires of Atlantis, its edge sharp enough to cut through the scales of leviathans. Yet as he raised it, the voices in the water grew louder, whispering, pleading, warning. He understood then, this was not merely a battle of strength, but of will. The first guardian lunged, its massive form tearing through the darkness. Its body was serpentine, scales glimmering like obsidian, jaws lined with teeth longer than Kael's arm. Kael dodged, the force of its passing nearly ripping him from the current. He slashed with his blade, sparks of light scattering through the water as steel met scale. The guardian recoiled but did not fall. It hissed, a sound that shook the abyss like an earthquake. Another followed, a beast with wings of water and eyes like molten gold. It struck from above, its talons slicing through the sea itself. Kael spun, his body moving with the current, his blade catching the creature's strike and deflecting it into the shadows. But he knew he could not fight them forever. The abyss was endless, and the guardians were many. The crown pulsed again, brighter now, as though urging him closer. Kael swam toward it, the voices in his mind rising into a chorus. Some urged him to claim it, to wield its power and command the guardians. Others warned him to resist, to leave it untouched lest the ocean consume him. The pressure was immense, crushing him from all sides. His lungs burned, his muscles screamed, but still he pressed on. A third guardian emerged, larger than the others, its body shaped from the very darkness of the deep. Its form was shifting, undefined, as though it were the embodiment of the abyss itself. It opened its maw, and from it came not a roar but a silence so profound it froze the water around him. Kael felt his soul tremble beneath its gaze. This was no mere guardian it was judgment itself. He fought with everything he had, his blade flashing like lightning in the dark. He struck, dodged, twisted, each movement guided not by thought but by instinct. The water became his ally, carrying him where he needed to go, wrapping around him like armor. Yet with every strike, the guardians pressed harder, their fury unrelenting. He was not their enemy, he realized. He was their test. At last, exhausted, Kael hovered before the crown. The guardians circled him, their eyes burning, their voices merging with the chorus in his mind. He understood then what the prophecy had always meant. The crown was not a prize to be won, nor a curse to be feared. It was a choice between power and sacrifice, between dominion and harmony. The guardians were not there to keep him from Ida, they were there to see what he would choose. His hand trembled as he reached again. The crown glowed brighter, its coral branches stretching toward him like living arms. He could feel its heartbeat merging with his own, could feel the Oceana-Euro's power coursing through his veins. If he claimed it, he would be more than a man. He would be the ocean itself. Atlantis would never fall, but neither would it be free. The Oraclea's words returned to him, soft and sorrowful, every prophecy has a price. And yours will demand more than you are willing to give. Kael closed his eyes, and in that moment, he saw Atlantis not in ruins, not in flames, but as it had been. Children laughing on the shores. Scholars bending over their scrolls. Fishermen casting their nets into calm waters. His people, his family, his home. He knew then what the sea was asking. He pulled his hand back. The crown pulsed in protest, the guardians roaring in fury. The voices screamed in his mind, demanding that he take it, begging him not to. But Kael only whispered into the water, his voice steady though his heart broke. Oa will not claim what was never meant to be mine. I will not enslave the sea. I will protect it. A euro the crown dimmed, its glow softening, as though sighing in relief. The guardians stilled, their massive forms bowing ever so slightly, their eyes dimming from fire to embers. One by one, they receded into the darkness, vanishing into the abyss. The silence that followed was profound, a stillness that felt like peace. Kael floated before the crown, tears mingling with the salt of the sea. He had passed the test. But even as relief washed over him, a shadow of dread lingered. For though he had resisted, though he had chosen harmony over power, the prophecy was not yet fulfilled. The crown remained, untouched but alive, waiting for another, waiting for a future when greed might again awaken it. And Atlantis still stood on the edge of ruin, its people blind to the truth. Kael knew then that his path was far from over. He could not simply return to his city and tell them what he had seen. They would not believe him. They would see only weakness, only a prince who refused the destiny they demanded. And yet, if he stayed away, Atlantis would continue its descent into madness, tearing itself apart in pursuit of a power it was never meant to wield. He took one last look at the crown, its faint glow pulsing like the heartbeat of the ocean, and then he turned away. His journey back to the surface was long, his body aching, his soul heavier than ever before. When at last he broke through the waves, the stars greeted him, cold and distant, as though they too watched with sorrow. The sea was quiet, but Kael knew it would not remain so. The prophecy had shifted, reshaped by his choice, but it had not ended. He was the wave, as the oracle had said. And a wave, no matter how gentle, must one day crash. The journey back to Atlantis was not swift. The sea, though calm, seemed endless, stretching into days that blurred together. Kael drifted across the waters, his body battered from the trials of the abyss, his spirit heavy with the weight of what he had seen. At night he gazed at the stars, wondering if they, too, had witnessed the Krona Euro's glow, the Guardians' Euro fury, and the choice he had made. In the silence, he thought of his father, of the oracle, of the people who once looked at him with hope but now with fear. He thought of how they would see him when he returned a Euro, not as a savior, not as a prince, but as a man who had touched destiny and refused to wield it. When at last the golden spires of Atlantis broke the horizon, shimmering above the waves, Kael Euro's heart twisted with both relief and dread. The city stood proud as ever, its towers gleaming in the sunlight, its streets alive with movement. Yet beneath the beauty, Kael felt the tremor of unrest. He had left in secrecy, but his absence would not have gone unnoticed. And now, returning without the crown, he knew the council would not welcome him with open arms. The harbor was eerily still as his vessel approached. Guards lined the docks, their eyes sharp, their hands resting on spears tipped with steel that glinted in the light. Word of his arrival had already reached the council. As Kael stepped onto the stone pier, whispers rippled through the crowd that had gathered. Some bowed their heads in respect, but most only starred a Euro, eyes wide, faces pale, voices hushed with suspicion. He could hear their murmurs. The cursed prince. The one who carries the prophecy. The reason storms rise against us. The council awaited him in the great hall, their faces carved from stone, their eyes like hawks. His father, the king, sat upon the throne, his expression torn between relief and worry. The oracle, frail and bent, lingered at the edges of the chamber, her eyes locked on Kael with a sorrow that pierced deeper than any blade. A Euro OU left without permission, a Euro one counselor hissed, his voice sharp. A Euro OU abandoned your city in its time of need. A Euro OA sought the truth, a Euro Kael replied, his voice steady though his chest burned with anger. A Euro OU would have me sit idle while Atlantis tears itself apart searching for what was never meant to be ours. I have seen the crown. I have seen the abyss. And I have chosen. A Euro the words struck the hall like thunder. Murmurs erupted, some shocked, some furious. The king leaned forward, his voice heavy. A Euro OU have seen it. You stood before the crown itself. A Euro Kael met his father a Euro's gaze and nodded. A Euro OI's. And I did not claim it. It does not belong to us. It was never meant to be wielded by men. It is the Oceania Euro's heart, its balance, its burden. To take it would be to doom us all. A Euro gasps echoed. Some shouted in outrage, others in fear. One counselor rose, slamming his fist against the table. A Euro Olis. The crown is salvation. With it we could command the seas, conquer famine, end the storms that plague us. You had the chance, boy, and you let it slip through your fingers. Kael's anger flared. You think power will save you. You think to enslave the ocean when it has always given freely to those who respect it. I have seen what happens when greed reaches for what is not its own. I have seen Atlantis swallowed whole, drowned by its own arrogance. Is that the future you desire? Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. The King's hands tightened on the arms of his throne, his jaw clenched as he searched his Sona's face. The oracle broke the stillness with a voice soft yet sharp enough to cut. The boy speaks truth. The prophecy was never about conquest. It was a warning, a choice. He has made his, and in doing so has delayed the Oceana's wrath. But hear me, Counselor, this reprieve is not eternal. The crown remains, waiting. If you continue to seek it, the sea will rise, and nothing will remain. The chamber trembled with unease. Some counselors shifted uncomfortably, others glared with open hostility. One leaned forward, his voice dripping with contempt. You expect us to believe this tale? That the chosen prince, the wave of prophecy, stood before our salvation and turned away. No, Kael, you are afraid, you are weak, and because of your cowardice, Atlantis suffers. Kael's hand tightened around the hilt of his blade, but he forced himself to remain still. Anger would only fuel their suspicion. He spoke instead with calm resolve. If weakness is choosing peace over destruction, then I will bear it. If cowardice is refusing to enslave the sea, then I embrace it. Call me what you will, but know this, the ocean watches. It knows what you desire. And if you continue down this path, it will not forgive. The king rose from his throne, his voice booming through the hall. Oino. Silence fell instantly. His gaze moved from the counselors to his son, torn between love and duty. Kael has spoken. He has seen what none of us have. His words cannot be ignored. But neither can our need. Atlantis suffers, storms tear at our shores, crops fail, ships vanish into the deep. Our people look to us for answers, for salvation. If not the crown, then what, my son? What hope do you offer them? Kael felt the weight of the question pressing down on him. The truth was, he had no answer, no solution to the suffering that gnawed at Atlantis day by day. All he had was the vision of ruin, the memory of the Chrona's pulse, and the knowledge that to claim it would be the end. He drew a breath, his voice low but firm. Oop does not lie in a crown. It lies in us, in remembering who we are, in respecting the sea as we once did. We have grown arrogant, blind. If we return to balance, if we choose humility over greed, the ocean may yet grant us mercy. His words hung in the air, fragile and uncertain. Some scoffed, dismissing him as a dreamer. Others shifted uneasily, torn between disbelief and the echo of truth in his voice. The King's face softened with sorrow, his eyes heavy with the weight of an impossible choice. The oracle nodded, her frail frame trembling. Oe speaks the path of salvation. But it is the harder path, and the Counselor's heart is too deep in shadow to see it clearly. The council erupted into argument, voices clashing like storms. Some demanded Kael's exile, branding him a traitor to his destiny. Others, though fewer, urged caution, suggesting that perhaps his warnings should be heeded. The hall became a tempest of fury and fear, until the King's hand rose once more. Oino, he said, his voice weary. This matter is not yet settled. We will convene again when the tide of reason returns. Kael was escorted from the chamber, guards flanking him as though he were a prisoner rather than a prince. Outside, the whispers of the people filled the streets. Some called his name with reverence, others with scorn. He felt their eyes burning into him, their hopes and their hatred alike pressing against his skin. That night, as he stood upon the balcony of his chamber, gazing out at the restless sea, Kael knew the truth. The council would not yield. Their hunger for the crown was too great, their fear too consuming. The prophecy had not ended with his choice, it had only begun. And soon, the wave would rise, and Atlantis would face the storm it had summoned. The council chamber had been silent when Kael left, but silence never lasts long in a city that feeds on whispers. By dawn, their decision was already forming in the shadows. They would not wait for balance, nor trust in Kael's restraint. To them, his refusal was proof of weakness, proof that he was unfit to carry the destiny foretold. If the prince would not take the crown, then the council would. And if the sea demanded a sacrifice, it would not be theirs. Behind closed doors, they gathered in secrecy, their faces lit by torchlight that flickered across stone walls carved with the history of their people. They spoke of ships already prepared, of divers trained in the forbidden arts, of sorcerers who had bent the laws of nature to breathe beneath the waves. A final expedition would be launched at a euro, not with prayers, not with wisdom, but with force. They would tear the crown from the Oceania Euro's depths, and Atlantis would claim dominion over sea and storm alike. But such secrets are never perfect, never complete. Kael felt it in the air before he heard the truth. The city moved differently, the guards restless, the shipyards buzzing at odd hours. It was in the way certain counselors avoided his gaze, their silence louder than any words. And then, one night, a servant came to him trembling with fear, whispering what he had overheard a euro, that the council had chosen their course, that a fleet would depart with the tide, bound for the abyss where Kael had stood before the crown. Kael Euro's blood turned cold. He had seen what awaited those who reached for the crown in arrogance. He had felt the wrath of the guardians, the crushing weight of the prophecy. If the Council Euro's men touched the relic, the ocean would not show mercy. Atlantis would not merely suffer a euro, it would fall. He sought out the oracle once more, her temple quiet and heavy with the scent of salt and smoke. She sat in her chair of driftwood, her eyes closed, her breath shallow. When she heard his footsteps, she spoke without opening her eyes. A euro oe warned them. They do not listen. A euro o they sail for the crown. A euro Kael said, his voice sharp with anger. A euro o they will bring ruin upon us all. A euro the oracle a euro's lips trembled into a sorrowful smile. A euro o sea does not forgive greed, Kael. But it remembers sacrifice. If the prophecy has not yet ended, it is because your role is not complete. A euro Kael fell to his knees before her. A euro o tell me what I must do. A euro her eyes opened then, cloudy yet piercing. A euro o you already know. The wave must crash. To save your people, you must give the sea what it demands. A euro her words cut deeper than any blade. He understood, though his heart rebelled. The sea had tested him before, had seen his refusal to claim its power. But now, it demanded more. Not a choice between power and restraint, but a choice between himself and his people. That night, Kael stood upon the shore, the moonlight painting the waters in silver. He watched the fleet preparing in the distance, their sails glowing faintly, their crews chanting prayers twisted into commands. He knew he could not stop them by force. To fight them would be to spill the blood of his own people, to divide Atlantis further. No, the only path left was the one the sea had set before him. He dove into the waves, letting them embrace him one last time. The current pulled him, not toward the city, not toward safety, but out into the vast darkness where the abyss waited. He swam with steady strokes, his body no longer resisting, his mind clear with resolve. For the first time, he did not feel fear in the whispers of the sea. He felt acceptance. He felt sorrow. He felt love. As he reached the edge of the chasm, the waters trembled as they had before, alive with the pulse of the crown. It glowed faintly below, untouched by the Council Euro's men, waiting in its silent throne of coral. The guardians stirred in the deep, their eyes opening, their forms shifting in the dark. They remembered him. They knew why he had returned. Kael hovered above the abyss, his chest tightening, his breath slowing. He thought of his father, his people, the children who played on the shores, the laughter of a city that had once been whole. He thought of Atlantis as it was, as it could be, if only it were given a chance to live. And then he spoke into the water, his voice steady, though it cracked with pain. A euro o take me. Spare them. A euro the crown flared with blinding light, brighter than it had ever glowed before. The guardians surged upward, their forms encircling him, their voices rising into a chorus that shook the sea. The abyss quaked, currents tearing through the deep, spirals of light and darkness entwining around him. Kael felt the ocean pour into his veins, filling him, consuming him, merging him into its endless expanse. His body burned with power, with pain, with peace. For a moment, he was everything. He was the wave and the shore, the storm and the calm, the predator and the prey. He was Atlantis and the abyss, life and death. The prophecy was not of a crown alone, but of Hema Euro, of the prince who would give himself to the sea so that his people might endure. The crown dissolved into light, its form breaking apart, scattering into the currents like shards of a star. The guardians bowed, their massive forms sinking back into the abyss. The ocean stilled, as though sighing in relief. The prophecy was fulfilled. The sea had claimed its price. Far above, the fleet that had set sail toward the abyss was caught in the sudden calm. The storms that had brewed around them dissipated. The waters grew still, the winds gentle, the stars above shining with quiet clarity. The crews fell to their knees, whispering in awe, for they had felt it too. A presence passing through them, a sacrifice too vast to name. Back in Atlantis, the oracle wept as she felt the tremor in her soul, the moment Kael became one with the sea. She whispered his name through her tears. Oe was the wave. And he has crashed. The king, upon his throne, felt the same shudder in his heart, though he did not yet know what it meant. He looked to the horizon, where the sea glimmered under moonlight, and whispered into the silence, Oemi sona a and in the city, though the people did not understand, though they did not know the truth of what had passed, they awoke the next morning to a sea that was calm, to skies that were clear, to a peace they had not known in many years. The storms had ceased. The ocean, for now, had forgiven. But deep beneath the waves, where light never reached, the memory of the crown still lingered. And though Kael had given himself to save his people, the sea remembered. It would always. Atlantis awoke to silence. For the first time in generations, no storms raged across the horizon, no waves pounded the shores with anger, no winds howled through the towers. The sea lay calm, glimmering under the morning sun like polished glass. The people emerged from their homes with cautious steps, their eyes scanning the horizon as though expecting the ocean to lash out once more. But the waters remained still, the air gentle, the world at peace. In the markets, voices rose in awe. Fishermen returned with nets overflowing, their boats untouched by sudden gales. Farmers looked up to the skies and saw not blackened clouds but clear blue expanse, the sun pouring warmth upon their fields. Children laughed as they ran along the beaches, no longer pulled back by fearful mothers. Atlantis breathed again, yet beneath the relief, an unease lingered, for none could explain the sudden mercy of the sea. In the palace, the king stood upon the balcony, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He had not slept. Something deep within him had shifted in the night, a tremor of loss so profound it hollowed his chest. He did not know the full truth, but he knew his son was gone. The crown had taken him, or the sea had claimed him, or perhaps both. He felt the emptiness of Kael's absence as surely as he felt his own heartbeat. The people looked to him for answers, but he had none. And so he remained silent, his grief hidden behind the mask of a ruler. The council, too, was restless. They could not ignore what had happened. The fleet that had sailed returned empty-handed, their captains pale and shaken. They spoke of the sudden calm, of a light beneath the waves that had blinded them, of whispers that filled their ears until they fell to their knees. They returned without the crown, without their purpose, humbled by something greater than their ambition. Yet even then, whispers of doubt persisted. Some still clung to the dream of dominion, blind to the lesson that had been given. But others began to waver, their certainty cracked by the weight of mystery. It was the oracle who spoke first, her frail voice carrying through the city like a tide. She told them of Kael, of the prophecy fulfilled, of the sacrifice made so that Atlantis might endure. She spoke of the prince who had chosen his people over himself, who had given his life to the sea so that theirs might be spared. Some believed her, their eyes brimming with tears as they whispered Kael's name. Others scoffed, unwilling to accept that salvation could come not from power but from surrender. Yet in their hearts, all felt the truth. The sea was calm because it had been satisfied. And only one had the courage to pay its price. The king listened to her words in silence, his face unreadable. When she finished, he stood before his people, his voice heavy with sorrow yet steady with pride. Oemi son is gone. But his choice has given us this peace. Do not squander it. Do not let his sacrifice be in vain. Remember him not as a prince cursed by prophecy, but as a man who loved his people more than himself. From that day onward, Kael's name spread not as an omen but as a legend. Songs were sung of the wave that crashed, of the prince who became the sea. Statues rose along the shores, carved from stone and coral, his likeness forever watching over the waters he had given himself to. Children grew up hearing his story, their eyes wide with wonder, their hearts filled with reverence. The prophecy that once brought fear now became a tale of hope, a reminder that destiny is not a chain but a choice. Yet even in peace, shadows lingered. The crown was gone, dissolved into the ocean, but its memory remained. The sea was calm, but its depths still whispered. The guardians slumbered, but they did not forget. And the oracle knew, though her time was short, that the tide would one day rise again. Prophecies are not endings but cycles, waves that return no matter how many times they break. As years passed, Atlantis flourished. The storms did not return, the harvests grew rich, the city thrived. But every so often, when the moon was high and the tide was strong, fishermen swore they saw a figure in the waves, a young man with eyes like the deep, watching them with sorrow and love. Children playing by the shore claimed to hear his voice in the surf, soft and gentle, warning them to be kind to the ocean. Some believed these were dreams, others omens, but those who knew the truth whispered his name with reverence. Kael, the boy who had been cursed by prophecy. The prince who had been abandoned by fear. The man who had given everything so that his people might live. The oracle passed quietly in her sleep not long after, a faint smile upon her lips. The king ruled until his final days, his heart heavy with the loss of his son but proud of the legacy he had left behind. And Atlantis, for a time, knew peace. But the sea is eternal, and so are its secrets. Beneath the calm surface, far in the abyss where light cannot reach, the remnants of the crown still linger, not as a relic, but as a memory. The ocean remembered the sacrifice, and it remembered the greed. It held both in its depths, waiting, watching. For one day, another would come. Another would hear the whispers. Another would face the choice. And when that day arrived, the sea would ask again. The wave had crashed, but the tide would always return.